I'd been seeing Mason for 10 months when he showed up just after sunrise on a Wednesday, palms restless in his hair, and asked to borrow my BMW. He said he had a big interview at an insurance firm downtown and didn't trust his own car to make it. I wanted to believe this was the start of better things for him, so I handed over the keys without a second thought. By Thursday, he texted that the interview had gone really well, so well, in fact, that they wanted him back the next day. Could he keep the car one more night? Then came another message about a weekend retreat where managers would be mingling the kind of off-site team building he couldn't miss if he wanted the job. I told myself maybe that's how corporate life works, even if the timing felt off. I took public transit and tried not to be irritated that my own car had suddenly become a long-term loner. By Sunday, my patience thinned to a thread. I had early clients on Monday and needed dependable transportation. Before texting Mason, I opened the BMW Connected Drive app to check on the car. The map blinked its location at the Ocean View Grand Resort 3 hours up the coast. The name tugged at my memory. I'd seen it somewhere else that week. Then, it clicked, Lila Hart. A woman from Mason's college orbit, who sometimes popped up in his likes, had been posting from a seaside resort all weekend. I scrolled through her stories, pool selfies, a sunset dinner, a glossy lobby shot. In one frame, a BMW key fob sat on a marble counter photographed like jewelry. It wasn't just any fob. There was a tiny nick by the lock button I knew by heart. A scar from an old move-in day where my keys met a concrete step. The photo caption was coy and celebratory. My stomach dropped. I borrowed my dad's pickup and drove north. The highway unspooled 3 quiet hours. To think either Mason had landed the most elaborate interview process in history or I was being played. The resort matched those posts. Valet smiles, stone floors, that amplified every footfall, light spilling through panes of glass that looked over bright water. Out by the pool, through a wall of windows, Mason sat with Lila, shoulders touching. They weren't awkward first-timers. The comfort in their body language had history baked in. There was a lounge bar along the glass. The Monday crowd was thin enough to hear the post-weekend hush. I ordered something I barely tasted and took a seat where the view framed their table perfectly. I opened the voice memo app, placed my phone on a napkin, and listened. Their voices carried easily. Mason scrolled, laughed, and tilted his screen toward Lila, narrating like a man auditioning for applause. He bragged about making it work while he built momentum, which in his rhythm translated to letting someone else bankroll the parts of life that should have been his. He talked about dinners covered, trips handled, and how convenient it was when loyalty points aligned with plans. My name wasn't spoken, but the outline was unmistakable. He painted me as reliable funding dressed up as a girlfriend. Lila asked light leading questions. Mason obliged with details. The smugness did what mirrors do. It clarified. Every time he referenced her card or her miles, the pronoun landed like a hammer blow. The bar stayed quiet. The recording kept running, and the pool light bounced off the glass while he rewrote my generosity as a strategy he'd perfected. When I'd heard enough, I closed the memo, left cash for the drink, and walked out past the bell desk to the parking lot, where my BMW sat exactly where the app said it would. Seeing it under the resort's palms made all of it concrete in a way screenshots never could. Back home that night, I laid out 3 neat stacks on my dining table: receipts, statements, and calendar entries. Patterns emerged the way constellations do once you know the shapes to trace charges in neighborhoods I hadn't visited, dates where I could prove I'd been elsewhere, totals that matched photos I was never in. The story I'd been told about interviews and retreats no longer needed to be disproved. It had unraveled on its own. By midnight, I had a recording, a location trail, and a paper spine to the past few months. Trust had gotten us here. Documentation would take it from here. And whatever came next, I wouldn't be going in blind. When Mason texted Tuesday afternoon that he was coming home with good news and wanted to celebrate, I set the table with something other than dinner. Receipts were sorted into rows, bank statements tabbed with sticky notes, my calendar open on a laptop. On my phone, a 15-minute voice memo waited at the start. He arrived wearing the grin of a man who expected applause. "They loved me," he said, listing steakhouses we could hit to mark the moment. I asked him to sit. His eyes snagged on the paperwork, and for a heartbeat, the grin stalled. He tried charm first. Those charges, temporary, reimbursable work expenses. The duplicate movie tickets, team events, I must have forgotten about. Hotel points, a logistics mix-up. He promised everything would make sense once the first paycheck cleared. When I pressed, he pivoted to outrage. "You recorded me?" he snapped when I tapped play. "That's a violation." He called it a joke taken out of context, just banter to impress someone. I let the audio run. His voice, clear as glass, paraded through the living room. Brags about dinners, covered, road trips, handled, and how easy it was to ask me for money without questions. When the recording ended, he tried tenderness. He floated declarations of love. He cried. Then he accused me of being paranoid of turning our relationship into an audit. I pointed to the statements charges, from places I could prove I wasn't purchases, that never reached my apartment. Fuel bought while I was out of town. He countered each line with something implausible, then circled back to complaint about trust, about surveillance, about how controlling I'd become. By midnight, I gave him the only terms that mattered. Return my keys immediately and transfer funds to cover the unauthorized charges. He laughed, actually laughed, and announced he'd be keeping the BMW through the week because his car was still in the shop and he had important meetings. When I didn't move, the mask slipped. He pulled every insecurity I'd ever shared onto the table and used them as knives. Desperate, clingy. No one else would tolerate me. Paying for things had been my idea. He insisted, so why was I acting betrayed? He left at dawn with my keys in his pocket. I spent the morning with my father at the county fleet garage where he's worked for 2 decades. He doesn't wear a badge, but he knows the procedures and the people who do. "You gave permission," he said evenly, "but you revoked it." He refused to return the car. That's theft. We documented everything, the recording, the location history, copies of the statements. By afternoon, a report was filed. Friday, around 10, while Mason was out for coffee or confidence, 2 deputies found him behind my wheel. The BMW was impounded. During the search, they recovered 2 cards bearing my name numbers I hadn't authorized, clones I hadn't known existed. The charges escalated from awkward to criminal in the space of a sidewalk pat-down. My phone lit up. Voicemail after voicemail, text after text. Each one, a different costume confusion, righteous, anger, bargaining, weeping. He wanted me to come down and fix this misunderstanding. He promised to pay everything back. Then he cursed me for ruining his future. I stopped listening. A few hours later, Lila posted a single gray photo from a parking lot bench, no location tag, just a caption about the worst day. I didn't screenshot it. I didn't need more exhibits. That evening, I spread the paperwork again, not because I doubted, but because staring at neat columns steadied my hands. The story had shifted from suspicion to proof to consequence. Consent had been stretched then snapped. Generosity had been rebranded as a revenue stream. Now finally the paperwork had caught up to the truth. When my mother came by with takeout, I told her I wasn't negotiating. No quiet deals, no payment plans from relatives in exchange for silence. What happened wasn't a relationship issue. It was theft and fraud wrapped in affection. Before bed, I checked the list on my phone, audio, saved report number, logged bank holds in place, replacement cards, en route. I set the keys from my father's truck in a dish by the door and turned off the lights. I had given trust freely. The rest I would document. The calls didn't stop after the arrest. If anything, the silence I gave Mason seemed to open a floodgate for everyone else who believed they could speak for him. My phone became a carousel, unknown numbers. Saved names I barely recognized. Voicemails that swung from syrup to acid in under a minute. The first voice I answered belonged to Carol, his mother. It was barely 7. She sounded winded, as if she'd raced the sun to my number. "You're a kind girl," she began. The kind of preface that always costs something. She told me Mason had made a mistake, that he was overwhelmed, that after his father passed, he'd struggled to find footing. She used phrases like, "Boys grow slower and the world is harsh," and he was just trying to impress the wrong crowd. Every time I tried to say theft, she reached for a softer synonym. Borrowing, miscommunication, pressure. I have proof, I said, keeping my voice even. Recordings, statements, the location history, cards in his wallet with my name. She exhaled into the phone like I was a child naming imaginary shapes in clouds. Sweetheart, don't let people fill your head. Relationships are complicated. If you drop this, I will help repay whatever's outstanding. We can handle it as a family. There it was. The offer shaped like generosity, a private settlement to erase a public crime. I told her I wasn't negotiating. This isn't a rough patch, I said. It's illegal. Something in her tone hardened. The mother who pleaded became the advocate who kept score. She asked whether those dinners hadn't benefited me too, whether some of those charges weren't mutually enjoyed. When I didn't pivot, she turned to disappointment as if I'd failed a test of compassion. We ended the call with her saying she would pray I find forgiveness. I set the phone face down and let the apartment air go quiet again. By midday, the quiet broke under a pinging string of messages from Aaron Mason's sister. There was nothing soft about hers. She called me controlling and vindictive, said. Mason had confided how suffocating I'd become, how I tracked him and hoarded receipts like trophies. The logic ran like a saw. If he'd used my cards, it was because I insisted on paying. If he'd borrowed the car, it was because I liked the leverage. If he'd gone away with Lila, it was because he needed space to find the courage to leave. She threatened to set the record straight online and to call my workplace to explain who you really are. I took screenshots, archived the thread, and blocked her number. Anger can point, but it rarely persuades. That afternoon brought Daniel the uncle, who introduced himself as the family's peacemaker. He had a well-modulated voice and a tidy vocabulary, restorative resolution path forward. He said he understood my hurt. He also said a criminal case would brand Mason for life, and that it would be better for everyone if we kept things within the circle. He proposed a repayment plan, installments, deadlines, documented good faith. He floated the idea of community service in place of a record. When I asked why the plan didn't involve a courtroom, he chuckled ruefully about how young people sometimes don't grasp consequences until it's too late. And then in trying to reassure me that this wasn't who Mason really is, Daniel told stories he shouldn't have. There had been a college roommate and a credit card, a silly pizza thing handled privately. There had been a loan from their grandmother that had never returned. Family is family. There were close calls that the adults had smoothed over so he could stay on track. The pattern assembled itself faster than he could sand it down. Not an aberration, a habit trained by rescue. I told him I wouldn't be the next quiet fix. The harassment didn't look like harassment when you isolated a single message. Each one arrived wrapped in an explanation. But seen together, the push was obvious. Withdraw the report, forget the evidence trade. Justice for peace. If I felt unsteady, I recentered myself with paper and time. I logged each contact, names, numbers, timestamps, summaries. I reminded myself that being firm wasn't being cruel. The detective from the prosecutor's office called in the early evening. They'd finished the initial device search. On Mason's phone, they'd found high-resolution photos of my credit cards front and back and message threads that mapped out weekends the way a budget spreadsheet would. There were exchanges with Lila about reservations caps on spending and which story he'd use if I asked questions. And there were other threads, not explicit flirting, not always, but enough to sketch out a timeline that didn't fit the one I'd lived. Some of these with Lila go back to last spring, the detective said, careful without being delicate. After we hung up, I sat with the ache that comes with discovering you weren't just cheated on. You'd been demoted to a funding source while someone else held the title. In the spiral of rage and humiliation, there was also a clean line of clarity. Victimhood didn't make me powerless. It made me a witness, and witnesses write things down. When Carol called again the next morning, her voice had a different gravity. She said she'd seen some of what the prosecutor had shown them. She said she was embarrassed, ashamed even. Then, as if the apology had paid admission, she began to audit my pain. Did I notice earlier signs? Had I missed flags? Could I send a breakdown of the exact amount so we're not talking in exaggerations? The subtext was an old song. If you had been more watchful, none of this would have happened. I told her I wouldn't be forwarding anything. If she had questions, she could direct them to the case number. She reminded me she was a mother. I reminded her I was a person he stole from. Aaron's tone shifted too. After the threats, there came a message, shorter, hesitant, that she didn't know the full story. I stopped myself from explaining anything. I owed them boundaries, not education. Daniel tried one more time. He dressed the ask in new words. Closure, healing, spare the family. When I didn't bite, he accused me of spite. I said the only thing that mattered. This is not a relationship squabble, it's fraud and theft. I'm not trading it for quiet. On my dining table, the stacks of paper had become a kind of compass. Receipts, statements, a printed transcript of voicemails in a man's voice that told me who I was. Desperate, clingy, unlovable. None of that was evidence. All of it was manipulation. The evidence lived in dates and amounts and numbers that matched photos on a phone that wasn't mine. The evidence lived in the recording from the resort in the key fob scar that appeared in another woman's story, in the fact that the arresting deputies had removed 2 cards with my name from Mason's wallet. Facts didn't shout. They didn't need to. By the end of the week, I had stopped answering unknown numbers. I set an auto reply that said in the blandest possible words that any inquiries should go through the prosecutor's office. I told my manager at work the broad outlines, so a phone call from a stranger wouldn't surprise her. I asked my parents to keep their phones on Do Not Disturb at night. What people like to call drama is often just an organized attempt to make you question your own footing. Mine was steady. Before bed each night, I wrote a brief log. Who called, what they asked, what I said. It took 3 minutes and returned an hour of sleep. In those notes, I left a sentence I needed to see in my own handwriting. I am not the villain for insisting on the truth. It wasn't eloquent, but it was exact. More than anything else that week, it felt like traction. By the weekend, the storm had changed shape. It wasn't just noise anymore, it was choreography. Messages, apologies, proposals, all arriving as if someone had drawn up a family playbook overnight. I kept the phone on the counter while I folded laundry and let the buzzing pass through the room like weather. Saturday morning, Carol called again. I answered because my coffee had cooled, and because some part of me wanted to know which role she'd be playing today. Her voice was hoarse, smaller than before. They showed us some things, she said, not naming who they were. I didn't make her. She meant the prosecutor's office. I didn't know. The words were a stone dropping into deep water. I am ashamed, truly. I defended my son without... I didn't know. For a breath, I believed the apology might be the end of it. But apologies from people in panic often open doors to questions they don't have the right to ask. Were there signs, she ventured? Did you ever suspect? Maybe if someone had caught it earlier, if you had been more what I asked. Vigilant, she said quietly. I'm only trying to understand. You can understand by reading the case file, I said. What you're asking is how much of this is my fault. None, she swallowed. Then the offer again, tidier, formal this time. I'm prepared to make this right financially, she said. Whatever he spent, we will repay. If you could send the total and... No, I said. Questions go through the state. I'm not negotiating with the family of the person who stole from me. The conversation ended there, not with closure, but with the absence of it. My mother had come over early to sit with me while I returned calls. She'd been quiet on the couch, a book untouched in her lap. When I put the phone down, she reached for it, and without asking, dialed back the last number. I'll speak to her, Mom said. What followed wasn't shouting. My mother doesn't waste noise. It was precise. She drew a straight line from Carol's excuses to Mason's behavior, from the family's instinct, to protect their reputation, to the ease with which he had used me. She said what I had not said, that harassment would be documented as harassment, that any further middle-of-the-night pleading would go unanswered, that the time for family solutions was somewhere in the past, so none of us could reach. She ended with a sentence that landed like a period at the end of a long paragraph. Your son chose the conduct. We will choose the consequences. After the call, Mom pressed her palms to my cheeks for a second, as if to re-anchor me to my own face. Eat, she said, and I did, even though everything tasted like paper. By Sunday afternoon, Erin appeared at my door. My building has a video intercom. I could see that her hair was unbrushed and that she had tried and failed to make her eyes look as if she had slept. I considered not answering. But some choices if you make them compose you. I buzzed her in. She stood in the doorway she had once promised to burst through with threats, and she cried. Not the loud tears of a person who wants a scene, but the exhausted tears of someone who's discovered their family's script doesn't work outside the house. I was wrong, she said. I'm sorry for what I texted. I said things because that's what we do, what we've always done. We circle the wagons. I didn't make it easy. What do you want from me? I asked. To tell you something you should know, she said. She sat on the edge of the chair like a guest in a museum and told me what Mason had said when she visited him after the arrest, that he felt unlucky, not guilty, that he was angry I'd overreacted, that he thought I was exactly the kind of woman who could be managed with affection and small lies. No remorse, no reflection, only resentment at an interrupted arrangement. He talked about you like a problem to solve, Aaron said. And he talked about Lila like the future he was owed. She rubbed a palm along her jeans. We make excuses for him, we always have. I didn't see it until now. I wanted her to leave and I wanted her to stay. Both impulses were honest, only one was useful. Thank you for telling me, I said. I hope you'll take care of yourself. I will, she said. At the door, she almost turned back, almost asked for mercy on behalf of Blood. Instead, she said, "None of this is your fault," and left the words with me like a small, serviceable gift. Monday morning, the prosecutor called. The device analysts had finished a more thorough pass. Alongside the credit card photos already cataloged, there were message threads with Lila that dated back a year, vacation plans, budgets, notes about which lies traveled well. There were also other exchanges with acquaintances that weren't romances, so much as rehearsals, testing boundaries, borrowing, returning just enough to keep future requests possible. We've offered a plea, the prosecutor said, restitution in full, a no-contact order, community service, a misdemeanor in one count with a deferred judgment if conditions were met. It was more lenient than what my anger wanted, and more realistic than what my grief imagined justice could look like. And I asked. His counsel declined, she said. They intend to argue this was a relationship where permission was implied. They'll frame it as a misunderstanding over money, not intent to commit a crime. You have the recording, I said. He describes a plan. We do, she said. And it helps. We'll file the charges accordingly. I hung up, wrote the summary in my notebook, and stared at the sentence until the pen mark stopped vibrating. Then I went for a walk because air is medicine. On the way back, I bought a small plant for the kitchen window, a living thing that asked only for water and a little attention. It felt like an investment in a different kind of future than the one I'd been subsidizing. In the afternoon, Daniel called one last time, wearing a new tone, that of a man who has realized the social cost of a secret. He didn't speak in abstractions now. He named numbers. He offered to pay double what Mason had stolen to cover counseling bills, to provide a signed apology, and to guarantee that no one in the family would contact me again. All I had to do was withdraw the complaint. Why now, I asked, though I already knew. People are talking, he said. And the pronoun was not authorities. It was neighbors, colleagues, friends who heard a version and drew their own lines between facts. We'd like to put this behind us. I thought of my mother's sentence. Your son chose the conduct. We will choose the consequences. Money was never the point, I said. Silence isn't for sale. If you'd like to support someone, I suggest you start by supporting the women he hurts next, by letting the record be honest. He called me unyielding. He told me to search my heart. I said I had thoroughly, and that the search had turned up a backbone. That evening, I returned to the practical work of having a life. I changed the lock on my mailbox. I called the bank to confirm the reissued cards were in the mail. I backed up evidence to 2 different drives. I ate a real dinner and tasted salt and lemon and a little pepper. After dishes, I opened a fresh document and wrote the story of the last 10 months in simple declarative sentences. Not because anyone had asked for it, but because telling the truth to myself felt like a kind of insurance. Near midnight, a text from a number I knew too well found its way past all the blocks and filters. A different phone, maybe, or a borrowed one. 8 words, more or less. You ruined everything we could have been. There it was. The thesis of a man who confuses consequences with cruelty. I did not reply. I took a screenshot, forwarded it to the case email, and added a line to my nightly log. He still thinks the only thing broken is his plan. Sleep came more easily than I expected. In the morning light, found the kitchen plant and made a small square of brightness on the counter. I watered it. I checked the to-do list meeting with the victim advocate tomorrow, a call with the detective on Thursday time, blocked on Friday to deliver a copy set of documents to the office. Ordinary tasks arranged like stepping stones. On Wednesday, my mother asked if I wanted her to be with me at the courthouse when the prelim was calendared. I said yes, because strength isn't always a solo performance. My father offered to drive us out of habit and affection, and I said yes to that too. We are what we practice. For months, I had practiced doubt accommodation and self-erasure. Now I practice clarity. The world did not change around me. Work still demanded attention. The laundry still needed folding. The news still delivered bad headlines at breakfast. And yet some axis had shifted. I no longer held the story the way Mason told it. Desperate woman, generous to a fault, easily led. I held it in my own hands, a series of choices he made and a series of choices I made in response. That simple reframing did not undo the harm. It did not make the numbers on the statement smaller, but it made the path forward legible. A week after the arrest, Erin texted a photo of a handwritten letter. "I'm in therapy," she wrote beneath the picture. "This isn't a request for anything. Just letting you know I'm trying not to be the kind of sister who keeps the fire burning." I didn't respond because the message wasn't a question. But I felt something unclench. Accountability is not punishing. It's teaching a lesson you're willing to hear yourself. When the calendar invite finally arrived for the first hearing date, I accepted it with the same click I would give to a meeting at work. Then I printed it and tucked it into a folder labeled with a case number that had become a shorthand for a story I refused to carry unnamed. The night before the hearing, I stood in the doorway of my apartment and looked at the small dish by the entry where I keep keys. The fob to my BMW lay there, its tiny scar catching the kitchen light. It used to be an emblem of trust and then a token of betrayal. Now it was what it had always been, stripped of narrative, a key. It opened a door. It started an engine. It belonged to me. I turned out the lights and slept. Whatever came next, I would meet it documented, not diminished. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.